Like Sister said, we will continue. We will continue to study the book of Daniel, and today we'll be studying chapter 5. And I chose Belshazzar's feast because that's what the main thing in chapter 5 that the Bible talks about is something that happened in the feast. So let's get started. So who was Belshazzar? Let's look.
I can't hear you, sister. I'm not sure if you're still speaking or if something's with the mic. I could read what she has on the screen for now. After the death of King Nebuchadnezzar, his successor is his son, Evil Merodach. He rules for 2 years until he is assassinated and replaced by Neriglissar. After Neriglissar, Evil Merodach, brother-in-law and Assyrian named Nabonidus, takes control of the kingdom.
I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi is kind of not acting up. Were you guys able to hear me or no?
No.
To hear you now, right now we are.
Yeah, right now, yeah.
Okay, so you guys didn't hear me the whole time. Sorry.
No
If it stops, just if one of you guys can text me or let me know, because it doesn't let me know. I just started looking at my laptop going in circles.
Okay.
So sorry about that, guys. Okay, so we'll just start here with, I don't know, did you guys read it right now or? I think you were Emily, and I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No. I think I did finish. No worries. You could go.
Okay, so as Emily was mentioning to you guys, in chapter 5, we're gonna study about the feast that Belshazzar, King Belshazzar had. That's pretty much what chapter 5 talks about. And after Nebuchadnezzar's death, his successor was his son, and his son was assassinated. And we can see that I can't pronounce the name Nabonidus. I think in Spanish is Nabonido, took control of the kingdom. And after him, Nabonidus was married to Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, and he appointed his son Belshazzar to reign as the vice regent of Babylon. And if you guys have any questions, just let me know.
Okay.
So who was Belshazzar? He was the last king of Babylon. His name means Bel, protect the king. So they named him like that because they thought that Bel, the god Bel that they believed on, was going to protect them. And a lot of people think that Belshazzar was Nebuchadnezzar's son, but in reality, it was his grandson. And he was not the immediate successor, as we read in the previous slide, of King Nebuchadnezzar. And we can read that and find that in Jeremiah 52:31. If somebody can read the Bible verse in the bottom, please.
And in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 25th day of the month, Evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign, graciously freed Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and brought him out of prison. And he spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat above the seats of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoshaphat put off his prison garments, and every day of his life he dined regularly at the king's table. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king, according to his daily needs, until the day of his death, as long as he lived.
Thank you, Emily. So Evil Merodach, or also known as Amel Merodach, was the third king, right? We read that in the previous slide. And he was Nebuchadnezzar's successor. He was the one that freed the king of Judah. And something that caught my attention when I was reading Jeremiah 52:31 and 32 was through 33, sorry, I did a typo right there, was how God had mercy over David's descendant, because at least this king, before King Nebuchadnezzar's son was murdered, he freed him. He freed King Joachim, and that's showing God's mercy for King David's descendants. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to begin chapter 5. If I can have Adria, if you can read this for us, please.
King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000.
Thank you. So as King Belshazzar, sorry for the, sorry guys. He made this feast for 1,000 of his lords, right? We can see here that it says King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. As they were drinking the wine and they were in this feast, the city of Babylon was surrounded by the Persians, who have been surrounding Babylon for a while. And that night was the last night King Belshazzar reigned over the kingdom, because he was murdered that night and Babylon was conquered. So let's go to the next slide. If I can have Nathan read this for us, please.
Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
Thank you, Nathan. So here we can see that the king made a blasphemy, right? And he offended God by using the temple's golden vessels. Here we can see that Belshazzar didn't care, and in a mockery of God, he used the vessels. He used the temple's sacred vessels for his party, passing out wine. I don't know, probably he was trying to impress the nobles and their female companions. The worst part is the blasphemy, is how he praised their fake gods with the sacred vessels of our God. And let's look at the next slide. What a blasphemy is. It's slander to insult the honor of, to injure the reputation of, to attack, usually referring to cursing God or using abusive and cunning language about God. So we can see in the previous Bible verse that he did that, right? Because he was using the golden vessels to drink wine and to praise the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So we can see his big mistake here. And something that caught my attention a lot as I was reading chapter 5 is everything that happened, like everything that his grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar, went through back in those days when I'm guessing he was a child probably, or a young adolescent. Like he didn't learn that lesson. And we can see how history is going to repeat itself as we read Daniel chapter 5. So let's go to the next slide. So the writing on the wall. If I can have a volunteer to read this, please.
Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together.
Thank you. Here we can see, right, the king is scared because he cannot plead ignorance, because he knew about his grandfather's decrees and holiness attached to the Jewish goblets, to the cups that they used to drink the wine in. He didn't care he pretty much didn't care. He just didn't care. He just used the vessels, and we can see again how he is probably more careless and probably more prideful than King Nebuchadnezzar. So let's continue with the slides. If I can have a volunteer, please.
The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed.
Thank you. So the reason why I keep saying, once again, history repeats itself is because it reminds me of the previous chapters that we've been studying, how this king didn't learn his lesson. And now we have here in chapter 7, how the king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, right? And the wise men and everybody else trying to get the interpretation of the writing. But he wasn't able to. He wasn't able to get anyone from that kingdom to get the interpretation. And and we can also see here how he's promising to promote somebody, anyone who is able to interpret the handwriting. And on verse 7, we can see how Belshazzar, remember in the previous slide, I think it was the first slide that we read, how Belshazzar is the second ruler because his father is the first ruler. So whoever is able to interpret the writing in the wall will be the third ruler. So keep that in mind. And let's go to the next slide. If I can have Adria read it for us, please.
The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall, and the queen declared, "O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers." Excuse me. Because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel from the king named Belshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation.
Thank you. So on verse 10, we see the queen, right? The queen in verse 10 could be either his grandmother or, according to some scholars, his mother. And we can also see how she is reminding King Belshazzar that there is someone in the kingdom that is able to interpret the writing on the wall. Just like he had in the previous chapters that we have been studying, we can see how Daniel was able to interpret the dreams that King Nebuchadnezzar had. We also saw how not Daniel, but his friends, when they were put in the furnace for not worshiping that idol that King Nebuchadnezzar had, the statue. We saw how greatly God manifested himself. And we saw how King Nebuchadnezzar recognized that our God was the God of gods. And here we can see his grandson years later. It's scholars said that between chapter 4 and chapter 5, the one that we're studying now, it could either be 6 years from each chapter or 2 decades, which is about 20 years. But it doesn't really say. So let's go to the next slide. So Daniel interprets the handwriting. If I can have a volunteer to read it, please.
Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I have heard of you that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation. but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom.
Thank you, Emily. So here we can see on verse 13, how it says, and Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, you are that Daniel, right? The one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. So notice how he said, my father brought from Judah. Belshazzar calls Nebuchadnezzar his father, but this is a generic use of the word father, meaning ancestor. So once again, Belshazzar is not King Nebuchadnezzar's son, it's his grandson. And here we can also see how the king Belshazzar is trying to flatter Daniel and is summarizing the whole situation to Daniel, right? He's telling him what happened, but as we learn further, and go to the next slide, we're gonna see that Daniel didn't like it. And we're gonna see how Daniel's response to this king is way different to the way he responded to King Nebuchadnezzar. So let's go to the next slide. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. So like I said, if you guys pay attention here, we can see that Daniel is a bit more confrontational with the king, right? And obviously for a good reason, because Belshazzar has completely ignored all of the lessons of the past. And in a matter of a few years, he openly defied God. So he disobeyed God, he defied God, he did a blasphemy by using the golden vessels from the temple. He basically didn't care everything that King Nebuchadnezzar had gone through. Like basically he just disregarded and dismissed the history. And let's go to the next slide. If I can have a volunteer to read it, please.
King, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will.
Thank you. So once again, right, Daniel is reminding Belshazzar everything that his grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar, had done and everything that he went through and how he dismissed everything that he knew. He basically made a big mistake by praising his pagan gods with the golden vessels of the temple that belonged to God. Everything that happened, he just dismissed it. And I just wonder, like, when I was reading this chapter, I just wonder, like, what was Daniel thinking? Like, everything, all those years that he spent captive in Babylon, yeah, and everything that happened with King Nebuchadnezzar for his grandson to do that with the vessels. Like, I was wondering, like, what was going through his mind? I don't know. The more I read this, it just makes my mind spin a little bit. Let's go to the next slide. If I can have somebody read it, please.
And you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this, but you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you. And you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all yours, ways you have not honored.
Thank you. So I have a question, and probably we can go around and answer it. So do you guys think the blame is only upon Belshazzar, or is everybody that was drinking from the cups? We can start with Adrian, and then you can call on someone.
I'm thinking more like Belshazzar, kind of I'm just thinking like, he's the king or whatever, like has a lot of responsibility, you know? Um, yeah. And I'll pass this to Nathan.
Yeah, I would say Belshazzar, mostly because he didn't really have humility in his heart.
Who would you like to pick? Go next.
I'll pick on Josue.
What was the question real quick?
Do you think the responsibility or it was on Belshazzar or against everybody that drank the wine with him?
Probably Belshazzar, because yeah, probably it was Belshazzar. Um, uh, I want to pick on. I was about to say Omar, but I don't. Hermano Omar, but I don't think he's there yet. So I guess I'll pick on Adriel or Hermananji.
Yeah, of course. Just as you guys mentioned, it is on Belchaz, the King Belshazzar, well, co-regent, right? We see in verse, which one was it? Verse 22, but you, his son, have not humbled. Okay, because I was reading mine, but right here, I'm gonna read it for me. But and you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. Like Daniel's reminding him since verse right when he started speaking to King Belshazzar. He said, he kind of reminded him what God did to his, with his grandfather. And then here in 22, he tells him, you knew all this. And then how Claudia was explaining, right, the blasphemy he was doing by getting these holy vessels that were used in the temple to worship God in Jerusalem. And another word that I can think of is debauchery. If you guys have heard it, it just means extreme immorality. Imagine him putting in the same room, his wives and his concubines. I mean, you just imagine that. So it was debauchery what he was doing. So it was intolerable. I think he crossed the line. So it's Belshazzar who had complete blame. And like you guys were saying, he was a king. He's a responsible one. He's supposed to lead his people into doing good, but he was out of control and then drunk. You can imagine.
Thank you all. So like sister said, right? Sister Angie said, and everybody, all of you guys, yeah, it is Belshazzar's responsibility. But when we read verse 23, it says, but you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you. And you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways you have not honored. It just amazes me when I read this verse 23, how his defiant party pretty much cost him his life. Everything that I'm pretty sure if the wise men had to learn, and they had all these rules that they had to follow to come before the king, I'm pretty sure that Belshazzar, being the King Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, he pretty much had good teachers. I'm pretty sure he knew everything that his grandfather had gone through. And I'm pretty sure that Daniel isn't telling Belshazzar anything about Nebuchadnezzar that he doesn't already know. And a mighty ruler like King Nebuchadnezzar, to his grandson, it just seems like he was, I don't want to say amateur, but a pretty bad king. And we can see that his defiant party was the last party he ever had because of what he did. Like Sister Angie said, he crossed the line big time. Let's go to the next slide. If I can have somebody read it, please.
Then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Daniel 5:26-27.
Thank you. So here we can see the interpretation of the writing in the wall, right? How it says, then from his presence the hand was sent and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that it was inscribed, Mene, Mene, Tekel, and parsing. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to the end. So remember we said in the previous slides that the Persians were surrounding Babylon and they were going to take over that night. So this is what it means, that God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighted in the balances and found wanting. And Paris, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So that's something that we also learned when we were studying the statue that in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, right? Every kingdom was going to be lesser than the first one. And let's go to the next slide. If I can have somebody read verse 29, please.
Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. 31, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old.
Thank you. So that night, the Persians invaded Babylon, right? Cyrus, the great king of Medo-Persia, broke through the wall of Babylon by diverting the river flowing into the city so that his soldiers could enter through the river, through the river duct. And records show that this invasion was made possible because the entire city was involved in the Great Feast. So because everybody was in this feast, get drinking, and obviously they crossed the line, like Sister Angie said, and they did a blasphemy. They defied God, and he was careless for everything that his grandfather had gone through. The Persians were able to conquer Babylon, and all thanks to the feast. And that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Medo took over the kingdom. And I also have a video to show you guys. But here we can see that after Daniel also was able to interpret the message in the wall, he was proclaimed, right, the third ruler of the kingdom. Because remember, Belshazzar was the second, his father was the first. And something that was very interesting that caught my attention was that Daniel never revealed what language those words belong to. It doesn't state what type of language it was, even though some scholars do, but it doesn't really say. And I'm gonna show you guys the video. Let me know if you guys cannot hear the video, okay? This is where I got most of my information for my study. So let me share it with you guys.
What is the meaning of the phrase Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin? We're going to answer that question. You can also discover more on gotquestions.org. The phrase Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin appears in Daniel 5 along with its translation. Some translations spell Upharsin as Parsin. The phrase appeared on a wall in the palace of Belshazzar, the acting king of Babylon. He is referred to the son of Nebuchadnezzar, although he was not Nebuchadnezzar's immediate successor. The biblical account of the mysterious and frightening appearance of the phrase Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin has given rise to the modern expression, the handwriting on the wall, meaning a portent or warning of inevitable misfortune. Daniel 5 tells the story of the Babylonian ruler Belshazzar, a rich and debauched king who gave a banquet to his court. During the drunken party, the sacred vessels from the Jewish temple stolen by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC were used in a blasphemous manner. At the height of festivities, a man's hand was seen writing on the wall the mysterious words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. The king was terrified, but no one could understand what the words meant. All attempts at interpretation by Belshazzar's wise men failed until the prophet Daniel was called in. Daniel was one of the captives from Judah brought to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel was given wisdom from God to read and translate the words, which meant numbered, weighed, divided. Daniel told the king, "Here is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians." Perez is the singular form of Upharsin. The Bible never identifies what language the words were in. The handwriting on the wall proved true. In fact, it proved fatal for the dissolute Belshazzar. Just as Daniel had said, the kingdom of Babylon was divided between the Medes and the Persians, and it happened that very night. Belshazzar was slain and his kingdom passed to Darius the Mede. The appearance of Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin on the king's wall is a reminder that whatever we sow, that we will also reap. God is the judge. He justly weighs all matters and metes out retribution in his time. Sometimes God speaks very clearly into our lives, convicting us of sin and warning us of pending judgment. It does not pay to ignore the handwriting on the wall. That answers the question, what is the meaning of Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin? On our website, gotquestions.org, you will find a deeper discussion.
And that's all I have. If you guys have any questions, let me know, or comments.
Thank you, Sister Claudia, for the study. I could share some points that stood out to me. I screenshotted it, so let it load, sorry. For example, I screenshotted Daniel 5, 2-4. And I can read it. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem he brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. To my understanding, this was the part that you shared about blasphemy. Yes. So the definition, blasphemy is slander, insult the honor of, to injure the reputation of. Attack usually refers to cursing God or using abusive and cutting language about God. That's what stood out to me. The other part I screenshotted was Daniel 5, 7-9. This was the part, I won't read it all, but I learned that he did not learn by what he was doing. But Daniel later on interpreted to him what was going on, and that he needed to learn his lesson and to stop what he was doing. And then I learned that this king was not King Nebuchadnezzar's son, but it was his grandson. So those are some things I learned from this study. I'll call on Sister Angie next if you want to. Oh wait, no. she knows everything already. Let me go with brother Josue.
One thing that stood out to me is about how crazy it was that what God, well, not really. Well, yes, God wrote. The point is that the handwriting in the wall is what actually really happened. So like uh the division of los pueblos technically happened and all that stuff. That's what really stood out to me. I'm gonna pass this to Nathan if he wants to go next.
Well, for me, the most important part of this story is um, the just the handwriting on the wall part, because that was like the first kingdom to fall, like in the like according to that statue, in the king's dream that Daniel interpreted. So it's cool to connect those two and see the events play out as they did, because yeah, after that, that's when the Medo-Persians took over. It just, it's kind of cool to see like just the cycle of the kingdoms. For now, I'll pass this to Adriel.
I really like this chapter or the study. I think obviously that part, of the handwriting on the wall stood out because I can only imagine, how crazy that was, especially for them, and yeah, I think it goes to show. I think we kind of saw this last week too, of how God always kind of gives his warning in a way, like kind of leaving that message, and then or maybe, yeah, a warning, but also to probably, like, this is punishment that maybe we kind of forget, or I don't know, because it kind of reminds me too of this study I think Andrea gave a while ago, where she said, like, of course we know God's blessings and all that, but we should stay mindful of his punishment as well, like what it means to fear God. And I think this story shows that too, because obviously after what they did, the blasphemy, like, God's gonna retaliate, or there's gonna be consequences for that. So yeah, the kingdom suffered for their king's actions. Yeah, it's an interesting story. And I see Whitley. I don't know if you'd like to share as well.
She's at work. She did share that she's just able to listen in.
Okay.
Anybody else missing? No, I think everybody just Sister Angie, do you want to share?
Sure, sure. Um, wh- what really caught my attention of the whole Bible study, and thank you, Claudia. Thank you for the Bible study. Thank you for your effort of putting it together and bringing this Bible study to us. And what caught my attention, I guess, it's also how we can easily ignore um, God's commandments or take advantage, as Adrian was saying, sometimes we take advantage of God's mercy, right? We know that God is a merciful God. One of you guys were talking about that. God is a very merciful God, but there can be a point when God has to bring judgment because he's a just God. He can't tolerate sin. He is a just God. He is patient. Psalms 103 says, the Lord is merciful and gracious and slow to anger, even though we might think that God will come and strike us on the first error we make. No, he's so merciful and he gives us so many opportunities. And as we have been reading so many Bible stories, God has given so many opportunities. And then it says, he's slow to anger and abounding in mercy. That's our God. But here, King Belshazzar ignored everything, as we read, right, in chapter 5 says he ignored even the testimony that his grandfather gave. He must have seen, and we think it's a grandfather because we know that The Hebrew, they say that in the Hebrew language, saying father is the same as grandfather. There's no other word for grandfather. There's no Hebrew word for father. So they father, sometimes they say the father of the father. That's the word they use. So here his grandfather, he must have watched everything his grandfather went through before he actually humbled himself before God, but he completely ignored. So here King Belshazzar is not an ignorant person of what God expects of us humans when we come to his su conocimiento, you know, when we know about God, when we know his commandments. Okay, so he was not ignorant of all that. But we see that God had mercy upon him. But once he brought all those vessels that were consecrated for the worship of our God, then that's when he and then especially to use it, like I said in the beginning, that's where he crossed the line, especially to do what he was doing, the debauchery that was going on in his festivity. Now, mene tekel parsing, that really caught my attention because there's biblical scholars that say that mene tekel parsing is actually Arabic. That's a language that was spoken as well in Babylon. It was Arabic. The book of Daniel from chapter 1 through 6 is written in Arabic. And then I believe 7 through 12 is written in Hebrew. So that's why many believe that was written in Arabic. But just imagine the king maybe understood, maybe the words were all put together, or they're nouns like numbers. Maybe he saw numbers, balanced, Persia. Everybody was confused. What does this mean? But we see here how the wisdom that Daniel had came and revealed what it meant, telling him, you know what, this is too much already. Your day is ending, your kingdom will end. And then something that Adriel says, so true, the kingdom suffers because of the king's actions. And it just makes us think, right? Especially when we're in leadership. We really need to give example. If God has given us the privilege to lead in a certain area or in a ministry or anything that, you know, where there's people behind us, how important it is for us to actually be examples and try to guide those people into in the right path. So that, I don't know, it's just a beautiful Bible story. There's so much to learn from. So God bless you guys.
God bless you, sister. So again, thank you, Sister Claudia, for the study. We all learned a lot from it. Thank you for taking the time to research for us and prepare it and all that good stuff, right? Okay, ending prayer, Nathan. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.